What if the oldest civilizations weren't the first? What if buried beneath the temples of Egypt and the ziggurats of Sumer lie the echoes of something older, something stranger, something forgotten not by accident but by design? Tonight we drift through time, past the pyramids, beyond Babylon, into a silence so deep not even myth dared follow, because for centuries we were told the story of human history began in Mesopotamia, that 6,000 years ago writing was born, that empires rose, that man discovered fire, built homes and began to think. But what if we were late to our own story? Around the world ruins whisper, mountains hide structures never mentioned in any textbook, oceans cover entire cities no one remembers building, and temples aligned with stars that haven't shone there for 10,000 years still stand. These are not just anomalies, they are questions, the kind of questions that don't fade at dawn. The kind of questions that keep you up at night, even when the world around you is fast asleep. Because for everything we think we know, there are scars in stone, scripts left unread, and timelines that don't quite fit. And the deeper we dig, the older the world seems to get. Tonight we journey into the forgotten, into the theories they call fringe, into the evidence left out of your history classes. We are not here to prove or disprove, we are here to wonder, to drift, to question. Because sometimes history is not just what we are taught, it's what we're allowed to remember. And perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest civilization Earth ever knew is the one we forgot. They called it Göbekli Tepe, the navel of the Earth, a temple buried in silence, forgotten beneath layers of time until it refused to stay hidden. In 1994, a team of archaeologists unearthed something they weren't supposed to find. Massive stone pillars carved with symbols, animals, and memory, perfectly aligned, perfectly preserved, but impossibly old. How old? At least 12,000 years. That's 7,000 years before the pyramids, 6,500 years before the wheel, 5,000 years before the first known civilization. A temple older than farming, older than writing, older than any known religion, built somehow by people who were supposed to be hunter-gatherers, nomads, people without metal, without architecture, without any reason to even build something like this. So who were they? The pillars of Göbekli Tepe weigh up to 20 tons each, carved with tools we're told didn't exist, positioned with knowledge we're told they didn't have. Their shape, T-shaped monoliths, some say they represent deities, others beings not of this earth. Around the site, archaeologists discovered no signs of permanent settlement, no homes, no towns, just the temple, as if it was the only thing that mattered. And then something stranger, they buried it, stone by stone, deliberately. As if they wanted it forgotten, as if they knew one day someone would come looking. But why? Was Göbekli Tepe a temple, a star map, a remnant of a lost civilization, or a warning? The carvings tell stories we haven't fully decoded, celestial symbols, animal patterns linked to ancient constellations. Some researchers believe it maps the sky not as it is, but as it was 10,000 years ago. If that's true, then the builders of Göbekli Tepe not only understood the stars, they remembered them. But what civilization could do this before civilization itself? Mainstream history has no answer. Göbekli Tepe was not predicted, it doesn't fit the model, it bends the timeline, so most textbooks simply ignore it or footnote it as an exception. But some believe it's not the exception, it's the first clue, because if a site like this existed 12,000 years ago, it means something or someone was already awake while the rest of the world was still dreaming. And if they built this, what else did they leave behind? Or better yet, what did they take with them when they vanished? All across the planet there are stones that don't make sense. Megaliths so massive, so precise that even today's engineers admit we couldn't move them. Not with cranes, not with modern tools, not easily, and certainly not thousands of years ago. And yet they exist. Let's begin in Baalbek, Lebanon. There lies the stone of the pregnant woman, a single limestone block estimated to weigh over 1,000 tons. It was quarried, shaped, and somehow partially moved over 2,000 years ago. But no one knows how. Even today, with the strongest construction equipment, we couldn't replicate the process without immense effort. There are no records, no written instructions, just the stone waiting, watching, as if daring us to remember how it was done. In South America, high in the Andes, sits a place called Pumapunku, part of the ancient Tiwanaku complex. Here, giant andesite blocks lie scattered, some weighing up to 100 tons, carved with interlocking precision so fine modern machinists struggle to explain it. The angles are perfect. The cuts are smooth. There are no tool marks, just symmetry and silence. According to mainstream archaeology, these stones were carved with stone hammers and copper chisels. But that doesn't explain the straight grooves, the 90-degree internal angles, or the near laser-cut smoothness. Someone or something knew how to work with stone in a way we've forgotten. In Egypt, beneath the shadow of the pyramids, lies the Valley Temple at Giza, constructed with granite blocks weighing as much as 200 tons. The quarry, dozens of miles away, the transport method, unknown, the precision, unearthly. These aren't just old structures, they are fingerprints, traces of a kind of knowledge we don't teach because we no longer understand it. Some researchers suggest these ancient builders used lost forms of levitation, sound-based technology, or machines powered by forgotten principles. Others believe these sites are the leftovers of civilizations erased by cataclysm. Civilizations that rose, reached heights, and fell long before Mesopotamia ever made a mark in the sand. And yet, instead of rewriting our timelines, we often label these sites curious anomalies, archaeological puzzles to be filed away quietly. But ask yourself, why are there so many anomalies? Why are the largest stones always the oldest? Why do the most advanced techniques appear further back, not forward in time? We are told that history is linear, that progress only moves in one direction, but the stones suggest something else entirely. A cycle, a rise, a fall, and a memory carved into megaliths still trying to speak, but only to those willing to listen. If we follow these stones, not just where they lie, but what they imply, they may lead us to a chapter of history no one ever meant for us to find. One where the ancients were not primitive, but powerful. Long before the modern world began asking what was lost, the ancient world had already told us. The name was Atlantis, not a fantasy, not a fable, but a place described in vivid detail by Plato over 2,000 years ago. He did not call it a myth, he called it history. According to his dialogues, Atlantis was a powerful, advanced civilization that existed 9,000 years before his time, which would place it over 11,000 years ago. A city of grand architecture, precise engineering, and immense knowledge, ruled not by greed or conquest but by harmony. But then something changed, corruption crept in, power grew unchecked. The people of Atlantis turned away from wisdom and toward domination, and in a single night and day the island was swallowed by the sea. For generations, scholars dismissed the story as allegory, a political metaphor, a philosophical device, but what if it was? What if Plato was not just warning us, but remembering something humanity had already lived through? Around the world, from ancient Egypt to the Aztecs, from Mesopotamia to the Hopi of North America, there are stories of great floods, of cities swallowed by water, of civilizations lost to cataclysm, not legend, and the dates strangely similar. Around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, the same time Göbekli Tepe was built and perhaps buried. Geologists call this the end of the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden warming after the last ice age. During this time, sea levels rose rapidly, entire coastlines disappeared. If there were advanced civilizations near the ocean, they would now lie deep beneath it. And indeed, we've found hints. Submerged ruins off the coast of India, sunken structures near Japan, stone formations in the Caribbean that resemble roads and platforms. Are these natural formations or the ruins of something forgotten? Mainstream archaeology often avoids the question, but more and more researchers are beginning to wonder, what if Atlantis wasn't a myth but a memory, a global memory, a warning, because Plato did not end his story with the destruction of Atlantis. He ended it with a message that civilizations rise, they shine, and when they forget their purpose, when they forget balance, they fall. The gods, he said, do not punish with fire and thunder, they punish with silence, with forgetting. So perhaps Atlantis is not just a tale of a sunken island, but a metaphor for all lost knowledge, knowledge drowned not just by water, but by time, neglect, and the rewriting of history. And if that's true, we must ask ourselves, are we now remembering something we were never meant to forget? If Atlantis was the first warning, then perhaps the world has been whispering back ever since, not in stories but in stone. Beneath the waves, far from the reach of history books, lie cities that should not exist, not because they are myths but because we have no place for them on our timeline. Off the coast of India in the Gulf of Kambat, sonar scans revealed symmetrical structures buried under sediment, streets, walls, and possible steps. Radiocarbon dating of artifacts pulled from the site suggests they are over 9,000 years old, which would make them older than any known city on land. The mainstream response: silence. In Japan, near the island of Yonaguni, a massive stone structure lies beneath the water. Giant terraces, flat surfaces, sharp angles, all shaped as if by human hands. Some say it's a natural formation. Others see a sunken temple, a pyramid, a fragment of a forgotten civilization. Near Cuba, explorers have photographed what appears to be massive stone blocks in geometric patterns, hundreds of meters below the surface. No one knows who built them, no one knows when. And then there's Dwarka, the ancient city from Indian mythology said to be the home of Lord Krishna. Long considered a legend until parts of it were found beneath the sea near modern-day Gujarat. Stone walls, steps, and anchors buried under the ocean floor. These discoveries aren't isolated. Around the world, there are sunken ruins off the coasts of Egypt, Greece, Malta, Portugal, and the Caribbean, each telling the same story without words, that there was something here, that people lived, built, dreamed, and then vanished. The sea did not erase them, it preserved them, like a forgotten chapter sealed in salt, and yet mainstream history rarely adjusts. These sites are often dismissed, underfunded, or called coincidental formations. But what if we are looking at the remains of an entire world lost beneath the waves? A global civilization, or many, erased not by fantasy but by flood. If the end of the last ice age truly caused sea levels to rise over 100 meters, then everything built along ancient coastlines would now be submerged. And if humanity did thrive before history officially began, we wouldn't find their books or their bones. We would find the one thing that lasts: stone. Silent, heavy, undeniable. The problem is whether these cities existed. The problem is how little we are allowed to ask about them, because each stone beneath the water is a challenge to everything we've been told. And maybe that's why they remain where they are, hidden in the depths, not lost, just ignored, waiting for someone like you to remember. There are moments in history where the stones speak louder than the records, where a single cut through granite says more than 1,000 pages of textbook. Because across the world, scattered through jungles, deserts, and mountain peaks, lie ancient structures so precise, so mathematically perfect, that they seem out of place in the era they were built. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza stands not just as a monument, but as a mystery of geometry. Its base is aligned to true north within a fraction of a degree, something we would struggle to achieve today without satellite assistance. The pyramid's dimensions encode mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio, and when multiplied out, seem to reflect the dimensions of the Earth itself, its circumference, its radius, even its relationship to the Moon. But how could builders thousands of years ago, with no telescopes, no calculators, and supposedly no advanced math, encode cosmic knowledge into a tomb? Or was it never just a tomb at all? In South America, at a site called Sacsayhuaman in Peru, walls made of massive polygonal stones fit together with such accuracy that you cannot slide a blade of grass between them. No mortar, no modern equipment. Just stones weighing 100 tons or more locked together like a puzzle. How were they shaped? How were they lifted? And why are these structures still standing, perfectly intact, while modern buildings crumble with age? In Cambodia, the ancient city of Angkor Wat is not only the largest religious monument in the world, it is also a celestial calendar. Its towers align with solstices and equinoxes, its layout mirrors the constellation Draco, and its central sanctuary marks the precise solar zenith. But who measured these stars? Who built something so vast, so perfect in the 12th century, and why is there no record of the process? The deeper you look, the more questions arise. In Malta, the hypogeum of Halsaflieni, carved entirely underground, contains a chamber where sound vibrates at exactly 110 Hz, a frequency that affects the human brain. In India, the 1,000-year-old Brihadiswara temple was topped with a granite dome weighing 80 tons, somehow lifted to the summit without cranes or steel. These are not isolated anomalies, they are patterns. Across continents, across centuries, we find structures that suggest not just intelligence, but mastery. Knowledge of astronomy, vibration, energy, mathematics, magnetism. Knowledge that we lost, or perhaps were never meant to keep. And that raises the quietest, most unsettling question of all. Did someone once know how the universe worked, and if so, who decided it was better we forget? Long before science tried to explain our origins, stories did, not with charts and data, but with warnings whispered through generations. Nearly every ancient culture from every corner of the world tells the same tale, that once, long ago, there was a flood. A great deluge that swallowed cities, washed away empires, and marked the end of something the world was never supposed to forget. In the Bible, it's the story of Noah, a righteous man chosen to survive while the rest of the world was drowned for its wickedness. In the Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, it is Utnapishtim who builds a great ark under the guidance of the gods. In Hindu texts, the Matsya Purana tells of Manu, warned by a talking fish of an oncoming flood. In Greek mythology, Zeus sends a deluge to wipe out humanity, sparing only Deucalion and Pyrrha. In Aboriginal Australia, Native America, Mesoamerica, West Africa, Southeast Asia, the pattern repeats. Different names, different gods, but always the same event. A world lost beneath water, cities gone, knowledge erased, survivors tasked with remembering. Are these merely symbolic tales of rebirth, or do they hint at something real, something that happened not once but many times in our deep and unrecorded past? Around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, global temperatures rose dramatically. Massive ice sheets melted and sea levels surged over 100 meters. Coastlines vanished. Inland seas overflowed. Landscapes shifted forever. If humanity had built anything near those ancient shores, anything advanced, organized, meaningful, it would now lie deep beneath the ocean, beyond the reach of traditional archaeology. And that's exactly what we find. Underwater ruins in India, stone roads in the Caribbean, sunken structures near Japan. Combined with the flood myths of dozens of cultures that never met, separated by oceans and language, we must ask, were they remembering something they had seen? Something passed down not as fiction but as truth disguised as story. In ancient Sumer, the earliest known civilization, kings listed in stone tablets ruled for thousands of years before the flood, reigns so impossibly long that modern historians call them myth. But what if those kings ruled before the flood changed the world? What if they were part of a civilization that rose before the deluge, a world erased but not entirely forgotten? Perhaps myths are not lies. Perhaps they are memory in survival mode, fractured, symbolic, reshaped by time but still pointing in the same direction, toward a past older than we're allowed to imagine, a time before time, when humanity knew more and then lost everything. There are maps that shouldn't exist, maps that show places we weren't supposed to know, coastlines unmapped by explorers, continents drawn before discovery, and terrain that lies buried beneath ice today, all captured with eerie precision by civilizations we are told were blind to the wider world. The most famous is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral using older source material now lost. It depicts the coasts of South America, Africa, and something even stranger, Antarctica. But not the Antarctica we see today, frozen and snow-covered. The Piri Reis map appears to show the continent as it would look ice-free, complete with mountains and coastal lines that match what modern satellites have only recently confirmed. According to mainstream history, Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1820, and no accurate survey of its ice-free landmass could have existed before the invention of advanced sonar mapping in the 20th century. And yet there it is. Some researchers believe these source maps were ancient, preserved through secret knowledge passed down over generations. Others suggest they were copied from even older civilizations long vanished. But Piri Reis isn't alone. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531 also shows an ice-free Antarctica, complete with rivers and mountain ranges. The Buach map from 1737 shows the continent split into two land masses, something geologists only confirmed after decades of seismic research. How could this be possible? Who charted the land beneath the ice and when? According to the U.S. Air Force's own analysis in the 1960s, the geography on some of these maps aligns more closely with what lies under the ice than with any known post-discovery surveys. And if that's true, then the maps must have originated at a time when Antarctica wasn't frozen, which would place their source material over 6,000 years ago or more. This challenges everything we know about seafaring, navigation, and ancient cartography. It suggests that someone somewhere was not only exploring the globe, but documenting it with extraordinary accuracy. Some point to the Library of Alexandria as a possible source. Others look to the fabled maps of Atlantis or the knowledge preserved in the Vatican's secret archives. But one truth becomes harder to ignore. The people who made these maps, or the civilizations they borrowed from, had a level of awareness we no longer attribute to the ancient world. It wasn't just geography. It was memory. Memory etched in ink, passed between hands in silence until one day it resurfaced and rewrote the borders of what we thought we knew. Because if you can map a place you've never seen, it means you've either imagined the impossible or remembered the unthinkable. We think of history as a straight line, a clean progression from primitive to advanced, from ignorance to enlightenment, one invention at a time. But what if that timeline is wrong? What if everything we know about the order of events, the age of monuments, and the rise of civilization is based on assumptions that don't hold up? Much of modern chronology depends on radiocarbon dating, a powerful tool, but one that becomes less reliable the farther back we go. Variations in atmospheric carbon, solar activity, and even volcanic eruptions can skew results by centuries. And when we rely on historical documents, we are trusting sources that may themselves be distorted, political, or incomplete. Take the Dark Ages, a period in Europe where history seems to go silent, nearly 300 years with almost no advancement, few records, and major gaps in continuity. Some researchers like Dr. Heribert Illig have proposed the phantom time hypothesis, the idea that this entire era may have been artificially inserted into the timeline. According to this theory, part of the early medieval period never happened. Calendars were manipulated, history was rewritten, and we may be living hundreds of years earlier than we think. While most historians reject the idea, it raises a deeper question. How much of our timeline is based on faith in flawed systems? Even ancient texts and king lists often contradict one another. In Egypt, overlapping dynasties and gaps in records create a blurry chronology that archaeologists must fill with estimates. In Sumer, the kings who ruled before the flood are said to have reigned for thousands of years, something dismissed as myth but never fully explained. And then there are the arts, out-of-place artifacts, objects that defy their assigned era. Ancient batteries, advanced metalwork, maps too accurate. Bones too old, tools too refined. Every time an artifact appears to be older than it should be, it's usually labeled a curiosity or quietly ignored. But what if these anomalies aren't the exception but the rule? What if our understanding of history isn't a clear timeline but a broken mosaic, pieces rearranged to fit a narrative rather than reflect the truth? A timeline based not on what we know, but on what we allow ourselves to believe. Because if the sequence of events is flawed, then everything built upon it, our education, our worldview, even our identity, must be questioned. And that kind of truth is harder to face than any lost city or ancient map. That truth suggests not just a different past, but a different story altogether. Scattered across museums, basements, and locked-away vaults lie objects that don't belong. They sit behind glass or in forgotten drawers labeled with vague descriptions or sometimes no labels at all, because these are not ordinary artifacts. These are anomalies, pieces of the past that shouldn't exist. Take, for instance, the Antikythera mechanism, discovered in 1901 inside a shipwreck off the coast of Greece. At first, it looked like a lump of corroded bronze. But when researchers studied it more closely, they uncovered something astonishing. A complex mechanical device with gears, dials, and astonishing precision. Over 30 bronze gears intricately connected, forming what is now considered the world's first analog computer. It could predict lunar eclipses, planetary positions, and even track the 4-year Olympic cycle. And yet it dates back over 2,000 years, at a time when such engineering was supposedly impossible. No other object like it would be built again for more than 1,000 years. So where did the knowledge go? Who made it, and why didn't they teach anyone else? Then there's the Baghdad battery, a clay jar, a copper tube, and an iron rod, estimated to be nearly 2,000 years old. When filled with an acidic solution like vinegar or lemon juice, it produces an electric charge. Was it really a battery? If so, what was it powering, and how did someone discover that centuries before modern electricity? Or consider the Dendera light, a strange carving in an Egyptian temple that seems to depict a glowing bulb, complete with wires and a power source. Mainstream scholars dismiss it as symbolic, but others wonder, is it symbolism or memory? In Colombia, dozens of small golden figurines were found, shaped like animals with wings, until someone noticed they more closely resembled airplanes, complete with tail fins and stabilizers. When scaled up, they actually flew. In India, ancient texts describe flying machines called vimanas, powered by mysterious engines and capable of vertical takeoff. In Bolivia, a perfectly carved stone disc, just a few inches thick, bears spiraling grooves too precise to be hand-cut. In South Africa, grooved metallic spheres over 3 billion years old were found embedded in rock, their origin unknown. Are these all just coincidences, misinterpretations, or are they the shattered remnants of knowledge too advanced for their time, or perhaps knowledge from a time we no longer remember? These objects tell no stories, they don't explain themselves. They wait quietly for someone to ask the question most are too afraid to ask. What if we are not the peak of human progress, but the rebooter? Not all history is written. Not all truth is carved in stone. Some of it is spoken, passed from voice to voice, generation to generation, like an echo trying not to fade. Across the world, long before there were books or scrolls, civilizations preserved their memory through stories, myths, legends, chants, and epics. And while many modern scholars treat these stories as metaphor, the people who told them often did not. Among the Aboriginal people of Australia, oral histories describe coastlines that no longer exist, places now underwater, described in such accurate detail that geologists have confirmed they match the post-ice age sea level rise over 10,000 years ago. These stories were told, not written, for millennia, suggesting a continuous memory stretching back farther than any textbook dares to reach. In North America, the Hopi speak of previous worlds, three great ages that ended in fire, flood, and ice. Each time humanity rose, fell, and began again. In Africa, the Dogon people tell of beings who came from the stars, bringing knowledge of Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye and undiscovered by Western science until the 20th century. In India, the Vedas, once entirely oral, describe advanced cities, flying machines, and cataclysmic wars with uncanny precision. In Polynesia, chants preserve migration routes across thousands of miles of open ocean. In Mesoamerica, the Popol Vuh tells of multiple creations, worlds formed and destroyed, lessons repeated until one version of humanity survived. We are told these are myths, symbolic, fictional, but what if there's something else? What if oral tradition is not the opposite of history, but its oldest form? What if stories were the first data, compressed, encoded, encrypted, and passed through time not because they were entertaining but because they were essential? Long before universities, long before archives, there were elders, storytellers, keepers of the memory. They didn't record dates, they preserved meaning. And perhaps that's why the stories still exist, because somewhere deep down we knew we'd need them again. In the end, the line between myth and memory may be thinner than we think. And those who laughed at legends may one day realize they were laughing at history all along. When ancient people told the story of where they came from, they rarely said they were the first. In fact, most insisted they were not. Again and again, from Egypt to the Andes, from Mesopotamia to Polynesia, civilizations claim that their knowledge, their cities, even their laws were gifts, handed down, remembered, preserved. The ancient Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, an age when gods walked the earth, built the pyramids, and taught mankind the principles of civilization. And to them, the Golden Age was not a future dream. It was the distant past. The Mayans spoke of previous worlds, destroyed and remade, each time seeded with wisdom from above. The Inca believed in the Viracochas, bearded, light-skinned gods who brought architecture and order before vanishing across the sea. The Sumerians, whose language still confounds linguists, claimed their civilization was given to them by the Anunnaki, deities who descended from the heavens with knowledge of math, writing, agriculture, and kingship. In India, the ancient texts describe a lineage of sages and divine beings who passed sacred wisdom to humankind, including knowledge of flight, medicine, and even nuclear-like weapons. The Greeks spoke of Titans, the Norse of the Aesir, and in the Old Testament there were the Nephilim, giants, the offspring of gods and mortals, described as men of renown in the ancient world. Again and again the theme returns, that the great achievements of ancient people were not entirely their own but inherited from someone or something that came before. Perhaps these were metaphors, attempts to explain the sudden rise of cities, calendars, and cathedrals. Or perhaps they were exactly what they claimed to be, memories of contact or continuity from a lost and powerful civilization that once walked the earth. What if the gods were not divine in the sense of miracles, but advanced in the way we now define technology? What if giants weren't imaginary, but remnants of a time when biology or conditions on Earth were different? And what if every origin story is not an invention, but a clue? These weren't cave paintings. These were cultures capable of building monuments that still defy understanding. And yet they all looked backward, not forward, when speaking of greatness. They remembered someone else, someone older, someone greater. And if we listen closely, they're not just telling us where they came from, they're warning us what happens when we forget. For much of the last 2,000 years, the guardians of knowledge were not scientists or scholars, they were the scribes of the church, the keepers of monasteries, the silent hands behind parchment and ink. And while we often think of history as something discovered, it's important to remember most of it was first approved. After the fall of Rome, as Europe entered the so-called Dark Ages, much of the ancient world's knowledge vanished, not in fire but in silence. Libraries were lost, scrolls were hidden. And for centuries, the Bible became the primary lens through which history was viewed. Anything that contradicted scripture, questioned divine order, or hinted at earlier truths was often labeled heresy. Copernicus delayed the publication of his heliocentric model until the year of his death. Giordano Bruno, who dared to imagine an infinite universe and ancient wisdom, was burned at the stake. The Church didn't just protect knowledge, it decided which parts of it were safe to know. In 391 AD, the Library of Alexandria, once the greatest repository of ancient thought, was attacked and likely destroyed under a Christian decree. What was lost there we'll never know. Entire timelines, maps, technologies, philosophies gone. In the Middle Ages, monks meticulously copied ancient texts, but not all of them. Many works from Greek, Egyptian, and Babylonian thinkers were buried or banned. Some were rewritten, others erased entirely. When the Julian calendar was replaced by the Gregorian calendar in 1582, 10 days were skipped overnight. But with it came a deeper shift, a reshaping of how time itself was measured and remembered. Religious councils determined which Gospels were canon and which were apocryphal. Dozens of early Christian texts, some of which spoke of hidden knowledge or alternate origin stories, were locked away or lost. The Vatican Library, said to contain over 50 miles of shelving, holds manuscripts never seen by public eyes, their contents known only to a select few. Does it hide secrets about ancient civilizations, lost science, or simply ideas deemed too dangerous to believe? We cannot say, but we can say this: the story of human history was not written all at once. It was edited, curated, and for long stretches of time controlled by a single institution, one with the power to decide what truth looked like and who was worthy of knowing it. Perhaps not everything was destroyed. Perhaps some truths were simply kept, locked in silence, waiting not to be discovered but to be remembered. Some say history is written by the victors, but even more often it's written by the survivors. And when those survivors fear what the past might reveal, they do more than forget. They erase. The loss of knowledge is not always an accident. Sometimes it's an intention. Across civilizations, across centuries, we find the same pattern. Libraries burned, scrolls destroyed, records lost to conquest, religion, or fear. In 213 BC, the Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huang ordered the burning of books, especially those that challenged state ideology. Hundreds of scholars were reportedly buried alive, their writings gone. In 391 AD, the Serapeum in Alexandria, part of the greater library complex, was destroyed, likely under Christian rule. Thousands of ancient manuscripts were turned to ash. Some say the knowledge of Atlantis, forgotten technologies, or ancient timelines were kept there, but we'll never know. In 1562, Spanish missionaries in Mesoamerica burned thousands of Maya codices, detailed books that contained astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and history. Only 3 remain today. What wisdom was lost? What memories destroyed by fire? In the Islamic world, during the Mongol siege of Baghdad in 1258, the House of Wisdom was ransacked and set ablaze. Its texts, covering centuries of thought, were dumped into the Tigris River, which, according to legend, ran black with ink. And even more quietly, history is erased in ways we don't always see. In the rewriting of timelines, the renaming of sites, the repurposing of temples, the turning of sacred symbols into taboos, archaeological sites reburied, artifacts mislabeled, languages forgotten, myths dismissed. In every case, the same result, a severing of the thread that connects us to what came before. We are left with fragments, stories without endings, structures without builders, ruins without names. And as time moves forward, the erasure continues, not through fire but through neglect, funding denied, research ignored, questions discouraged. Some of the most curious discoveries in history were never followed up on, not because they lacked significance, but because they lacked permission. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. Forgetting is not always a failure. Sometimes it's a strategy. And the greatest secrets of our past may not have been lost by chance, but hidden by choice. In the modern world, censorship doesn't always look like fire. It doesn't come in the form of burning scrolls or broken statues. Instead, it arrives in quieter ways, in ridicule, in silence, in the soft but firm closing of doors. Because even now there are truths you're not supposed to ask about. Scholars who question the timeline of human history are labeled pseudoscientists. Researchers who suggest ancient civilizations may have possessed lost knowledge are pushed to the fringe. Theories that challenge accepted models are dismissed, not debated. And if you go too far, you're discredited, not with evidence but with laughter. In universities, funding goes to safe ideas. Projects that push boundaries too far rarely see the light of day. Dig sites are selected not for their mystery, but for their ability to reinforce existing narratives. And when someone discovers something that doesn't fit, an out-of-place artifact, an impossible structure, a forgotten site, it's often set aside, explained away, or simply ignored. The mainstream has a framework, and anything that doesn't reinforce it is treated as noise. Not because it isn't interesting, but because it's inconvenient. Even the media plays a role. New discoveries are often sensationalized or softened. Ancient ruins are described as possibly ceremonial. Anomalies are said to be likely natural, always leaving just enough uncertainty to avoid further questioning. And while skepticism is healthy, it becomes censorship when it's selective, when it's used not to seek truth but to defend a version of it. In a world that values credentials over curiosity, challenging the past can feel like heresy. But truth isn't democratic. It doesn't care how many experts believe in it. It exists whether we recognize it or not. And sometimes the ones closest to the truth are the ones standing furthest from the spotlight. When the first archaeologist suggested that the Sphinx might be older than Egypt, he was dismissed. When researchers proposed ancient advanced knowledge at Göbekli Tepe, they were ignored for decades. Now those sites are changing everything. So ask yourself, how many other truths are we still ignoring? How many have we silenced, not because they were wrong, but because they were too early? In the end, the past may not be lost. It may simply be waiting behind a wall of polite censorship, waiting for someone to ask the question the world is too afraid to answer. If the great truths of our past were erased from public history, then we must ask, did anyone preserve them? Not in textbooks or museums, but in silence, in symbols, in secrets. Throughout history, whispers of forgotten knowledge have clung to the edges of society, kept alive not by nations but by brotherhoods, by those who passed memory from hand to hand in hidden rooms, behind locked doors, beneath veils of ritual. The Freemasons, for instance, trace their lineage to the builders of Solomon's Temple, a structure whose origins are steeped in mystery and sacred geometry. Their symbols, the compass, the square, the all-seeing eye, are said to encode ancient truths about creation, mathematics, and human potential. But what exactly are they protecting? The Rosicrucians, emerging in the early 1600s, claimed to hold secret wisdom from the East, alchemy, medicine, and cosmic understanding preserved since antiquity. They spoke of hidden masters, ancient texts, and a great plan to awaken humanity. In Egypt, the priests of Heliopolis were said to be guardians of sacred time, keepers of calendars and cycles older than the pyramids themselves. Their knowledge was passed only to initiates, protected from corruption. In Tibet, secret monastic orders claim to guard texts and technologies left behind by lost civilizations. In Ethiopia, ancient churches house relics and manuscripts said to predate even Christianity sealed away unread. And in the Vatican, deep beneath Rome, lies the largest private archive in the world. It contains thousands of years of collected knowledge, much of it unseen by public eyes. Could it include scrolls from Alexandria, maps of pre-flood Earth, records of civilizations that existed before time was written? We may never know, but we do know this: power protects knowledge. And if ancient people did once possess truths that could shift the world, truths about energy, consciousness, or the nature of time, then it makes sense that those truths were not destroyed, only hidden. Because some knowledge isn't lost, it's guarded, locked behind layers of ritual, symbolism, and secrecy, not to deceive the world, but perhaps to shield it. Or to wait for the right moment to return. Maybe, just maybe, the stories we dismiss as conspiracy are echoes of a time when remembering was dangerous. And the ones we call secret societies are just the last keepers of a memory the world tried to forget. We often think of history as a ladder, each century a step higher than the last. From fire to flight, from stone tools to satellites. But what if that ladder is a circle? What if we're not the first to climb it, just the first to do so again? Across the ancient world, we find hints of civilizations that rose to great heights, not just in stone but in thought. Structures built with impossible precision. Maps drawn before the continents were named. Legends of flying machines, energy sources, and vast cities lit by means unknown. Are these just stories? Or are they the fractured memories of a world that once was a world that reached a peak, then fell, forgotten not because it failed, but because it ended? In the writings of Plato, Atlantis was not just a city, it was an empire advanced in every way, lost in a single day. In the Indian Vedas, great wars were fought with weapons of light, chariots that flew, and sounds that shattered mountains. In the Book of Enoch, knowledge was given by beings from the sky, wisdom too powerful for man to hold. Could these be the echoes of a cycle in which civilizations rise, flourish, and collapse, not once but many times, each one leaving behind traces too scattered to fully piece together? Today, we marvel at AI, quantum computing, and nuclear power. But even now we struggle to explain how the ancients built pyramids aligned to the stars, or how temples were placed along lines with mathematical precision. Could we be rediscovering what they already knew? Could the forgotten past be not primitive but profound? Some physicists suggest that knowledge, like energy, is never truly lost, only transformed. Perhaps the same is true of civilizations. Perhaps we are not building something new but remembering something old. Something buried not just in ruins but in our DNA, in our stories, in the symbols carved into ancient walls. And if that's true, then the question isn't whether we've been here before. The question is how many times. Long before telescopes, before satellites and observatories, ancient people looked up and saw more than stars. They saw memory, they saw meaning, and somehow they understood things we still struggle to explain. Around the world, sacred sites are aligned with the heavens not by accident but with breathtaking precision. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned almost perfectly to true north, a feat so precise that even modern tools would struggle to replicate it. Its shafts point toward Orion's belt and Sirius, stars that were central to Egyptian mythology and the story of Osiris, the god of rebirth. In England, Stonehenge tracks the solstices. Its stones catch the light of the rising sun on the longest day of the year and the setting sun on the shortest. But why? In Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan is aligned to the Pleiades, a star cluster known to cultures across the globe, from the Maori of New Zealand to the Cherokee of North America. How did people separated by oceans all fixate on the same stars? In Cambodia, Angkor Wat mirrors the constellation Draco. In Peru, the Nazca lines stretch for miles, vast geoglyphs only visible from above, some of which align with celestial events. In the American Southwest, the ancestral Pueblones carved spiral petroglyphs that mark the summer solstice with a perfect shaft of light. These were not isolated observations. They were part of a pattern, a global awareness of the stars, of time, of cycles. But how did they do it? With no lenses, no satellites, no modern math, how did ancient people map the sky with such accuracy? Some say they watched night after night for generations. Others believe they inherited this knowledge, passed down from a time when humanity was more in tune with the universe. In myths, the stars are always important. Gods descend from them, heroes return to them, civilizations rise and fall by their patterns. But maybe the stars weren't just sacred, maybe they were familiar. Maybe ancient people knew where they came from. Maybe they weren't just looking at the sky, they were remembering it. Because if so many ancient structures point to the same celestial bodies, then perhaps those stars aren't just distant lights. Perhaps they're messages, coordinates, echoes from a time when Earth's story was still written in the sky. We look at ourselves, our cities, our satellites, our machines, and we believe we are the pinnacle, the first, the only. But what if we're not? What if we're not the beginning of the story, but the sequel? What if human civilization didn't start 6,000 years ago, but restarted, again and again, across thousands of years, across cycles so vast we no longer remember them? We see the signs, buried in stone, whispered in myth, hidden beneath waves. We find temples too old, tools too precise, knowledge too advanced for its time. We hear echoes of floods, fires, and skies gone dark, disasters that ended worlds, and still we believe we are the first. But what if the rise of man is not a straight line but a heartbeat, a rhythm of growth and forgetting, progress and collapse? Maybe the ruins we study are not remnants of what was behind us, but warnings of what always lies ahead. Maybe Atlantis was real. Maybe the builders of Göbekli Tepe were remembering something they had already lost. Maybe the Antikythera mechanism wasn't an invention, but a reconstruction. There is humility in asking. There is wisdom in not assuming we know. Because for all our data, all our science, all our pride, there are still stones we can't explain, maps we can't recreate, myths we can't quite dismiss. And in every ancient corner of this earth, something is trying to speak. Maybe humanity has risen before. Maybe it rose higher than we ever imagined. Maybe it fell harder than we can bear to know. And maybe, just maybe, the reason we can't explain the past is because the past isn't over, it's repeating. If you've made it this far, drifting with us through forgotten ruins and quiet stars, then perhaps a part of you has always known that there's more to our past than we've been told. More to remember, more to uncover. Maybe history didn't forget, maybe we were made to believe we were alone, that we started small, that we've always been climbing. But the stones tell a different story. So do the myths, the maps, the memories, the quiet ruins that wait for someone to listen. And maybe, just maybe, that someone is you, because in a world that moves too fast, that rewrites too quickly and remembers only what fits, you stopped. You looked, you asked, you wondered. That is where truth begins, not with facts or figures, but with stillness, with questions, with curiosity. So tonight, as you close your eyes, know this: the past is not gone. It's just sleeping, waiting for someone to dream it awake again. If this journey moved you, whispered to something deep inside, let it be the beginning. There are more mysteries, more truths buried beneath silence. And here at Midnight Chronicles, we'll keep digging. Until next time, sleep well and don't stop wondering.